Well, thank you very, very much to be here. Ricardo, thanks for
Thank you.
allowed me to
Andrés, tú hablas español.
¿Hablamos en español?
Necesitas hablar español, ¿no?
Hablemos en español. Un aplauso porque Dambisa habla en español. Are you sure? So you're joking. Okay. Dambisa, first of all, you wrote this important book, The Eighth. The first question is for you. Please tell us what's the problem with aid, and then what's your proposal? And then we will talk about at the bottom of the pyramid and what's the problem with poverty and your proposal. Please.
Gracias, and thank you very much to you, Andrés, for hosting me in Puebla. I'm very happy to be here. There's so many problems with aid. We could start with the issue of corruption, which people know about. I don't want to spend too much time on that. There are issues around how aid creates inflation. Dumping all this money into an economy actually can be very bad in creating inflation in a country. Aid leaves countries in massive debt and often unable to pay back that debt. I'm sure the Americans and the Europeans in the room will understand what we mean. But also, it can kill off a domestic export sector by throwing all these dollars into small economies that have different currencies. It kills off the domestic export sector and can actually mean that people end up unemployed. But if you ignore everything I've said up to now, I think it's very important to remember that the biggest problem with aid is that it distorts the psychology. People's self-confidence and their belief in themselves is completely distorted and damaged. I am from a country which is very small, Zambia. It's about 10 million people. I'm from a continent of 1 billion people, about 20% of the world's population. For the past 50 years, Africans have been convinced by the international community that they are unable to help or to contribute or to develop their own economies. This is the most damaging aspect of aid. The damaging policies that have encouraged Africans to believe that they are incapable of creating jobs, incapable of becoming scientists, doctors, lawyers, teachers, and also to convince Africans that the only thing that they are good for is to sit around with a begging bowl and wait for handouts. The good news, I believe, is that the world is changing. It's changing in a very dramatic way. The traditional donors, the United States and Europe, now have no money. They themselves are going to places like China and India and so on, asking for money. I believe this is a real opportunity for Africa, but also it's a real opportunity for the rest of the emerging world. Andreas, let me remind you. Let me remind you that there is no country in the history of the world. We've got thousands and thousands of years of history of the existence of man. There's not a single country that has achieved economic growth and meaningfully put a dent in poverty by relying on aid to the extent to which African countries rely on aid today. Not one country in history or today. Let me also remind you that we know what creates economic growth. We know that countries that trade with other countries do better than countries like North Korea and perhaps Cuba that don't trade. We know that investment is critical. It helps to build economies, it helps to build infrastructure, create jobs, and we know that countries that do not get investment tend to suffer. The important role as we go from 7 billion people today to 9 billion people in 2050, the important role for policymakers is to figure out how, in the world's poorest economies, are we going to encourage foreign direct investment, encourage domestic investment, which Ricardo, I'm sure, will speak to, but also encourage economic growth and job creation at home. And I can assure you that a strategy of convincing people that they are incapable of contributing to economic growth is not the way forward. This is not the formula for success that has made China what it is today, India, Brazil, even here in Mexico. It is not a formula of relying on somebody from somewhere else to come in and bail you out. I'll just conclude by reminding the audience that the psychology, the psychological attempt and campaign to make Africans feel like they're only good for war, disease, poverty, and corruption has been so damaging. And yet, do not forget, there are more poor people in India than there are in Africa. There are more poor people in China than there are in Africa. Our responsibility as global citizens is to make sure that we win the psychological war that we're facing. We cannot be convinced by other people that we are incapable. That is ultimately our job. And countries like China and India have shown that you can rise with dignity and have economic improvements if you do not rely on aid. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow. You bring a lot of people from Zambia. No, I'm just kidding. Ricardo, Moyo, as we say, we prefer Moyo than Bono policies. Moyo knows perfectly Asia, Africa. The problem on that part of the world could be comparative to Mexico, to Latin America. And how do you see?
Well, certainly what she's pointing out about Africa, I think makes a lot of sense. But let's not forget that in our country, here in Mexico, we have many places where poverty and ignorance is rampant. And paradoxically, at the national level, we are also trying the same things as the international community is trying in Africa. We're trying to send more money to these communities. The fact, as she pointed out, and I think very accurately, is that all wealth really depends on human capital. And if we don't build that human capital, money transfers is not going to do the job. So we see that in our country. We see that in Chiapas, in Oaxaca, in some parts of Puebla. And that brings me to a subject I want to address, which is inequality. Okay, so I'm a very rich person, and therefore I'm grossly unequal. But I want to talk about that up front. First, and in the sense that Mass just showed us, there's a lot of humor here, because to start, men and women are not equal. Women are vastly superior, right? Vastly. How can we talk about equality? They make human beings. We cooperate with a little bit. You know? But the fact is, inequality is an inherent characteristic of human beings. We saw our friend Amigo doing a fantastic job with the flamenco this morning. I would love to be able to do that, and I am green with envy because I cannot muster my talents to do the guitar thing or the dancing thing. I am unequal to them in every respect. And then we've seen the testimony of many thinkers here today who have dedicated their lives to their passions, and clearly they know much more about their subject than I do. So inequality per se is not something that we will be able to eliminate. On the contrary, that is a fact of life, a fact of humanity. Now, and here's the deal. What we must strive to eliminate is the inequality of opportunities. And that is a very serious matter. So when we started thinking about the bottom of the pyramid and those 7 billion people in the world, and only the top 20% are in the formal economy, and there's 5 billion people here at the bottom of the pyramid who are lacking access to all kinds of opportunities, we thought, well, we should do something to give them access to what all the rest of us take for granted. And let's talk about a few of those things. When we say financial services, I mean, for all of us here, having a bank account where you keep your money is nothing. Having a credit card is nothing. And asking for a loan is nothing. And sending money from here to there, no problem. Life insurance, no problem. Pension management, no problem. But at the bottom of the pyramid, they have no access to this. Why? Well, not only is there a lack of entrepreneurial vision here, but also there is a very specific regulatory action that impedes, paradoxically, the access of all these people to these services. When we started our bank in 2002, this is just 9 years ago, we started from zero. Today we have 20 million customers that pay no commissions, that access our bank from Monday to Sunday, from 9 to 9. They can keep their money there, and they can access a loan in the most favorable conditions. This didn't exist just 9 years ago. And when we go to all these countries across Latin America and frankly all over the world, it's the same situation. The banking system, the financial services system is designed for the top 20% of the pyramid. It's not designed for the bottom of the pyramid. And unfortunately, the regulators are not paying attention to this. And probably the worst thing that is happening now is how the most needy people, I'm going to say this, women, working women, heads of family, with children, with no husband, they're being cut off from access to credit. And people think, let's create jobs. Yes, but these women, they cannot go and take a job because they have to take care of the children at home. So last year we launched a very successful initiative called Micronegocio Azteca, and this is designed to give microcredit to groups of women. And I've been really surprised how in just 1 year we have over 350,000 women signed up. I was just on Tuesday on a convention here with 2,000 women, and they were all in a state of hyper ecstasy here because we are paying attention to their needs and we're giving them the means for them to drag themselves out of poverty. And I think that is the question. They don't want charity. They want the option, they want to have the opportunity to not be poor. And I think that's a very valuable thing, a lesson for me and maybe for somebody else.
Ricardo, so the formula for success first is human capital, and then it's a regulatory optimal framework that really helps instead of making things harder and much more difficult, and access to credit to whom?
Well, a few days ago I said something that created a lot of stir. I said the government is a really bad partner for small businessmen because it's a partner that demands a lot and gives very little. So my plea for governments, not only in Mexico, but across the world, would be just let them work. Don't interfere. Why so many permits?
Dambisa, tell us about numbers. I think it's much more than $1 trillion, no, in the last 20 or 30 or 40 years. How come that they still do the same policy if it's not working? Why? What's going on?
That's the question we have to ask. I think somebody somewhere said, doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Someone somewhere.
Yes.
The definition of madness.
Is the definition of madness.
Do the same thing, expect a different result.
Exactly. For 50 years, over the past 50 years, there's been $1 trillion of aid money that has gone to Africa. That is $100 for every man, woman, and child on the planet today. $1 trillion. There's nothing to show for it. Life expectancy has gone down. In the 1960s and 70s, life expectancy in my country was around 58. It's now 37. 60% of Africans are under the age of 24. In countries like Zambia, my own country, Uganda, and many other places across the African continent, 50% of the population is under the age of 15. And let me tell you, they have no more patience for the rubbish that is coming in the form of aid. They've got no more tolerance. They want holidays, they want iPhones, they want access to the international global market like everybody else. And frankly, why shouldn't they? There are 6 billion mobile phones on the planet. 2 billion mobile phone users have no access to banking services. These are the things we should be focusing our time on. There are fundamental problems, not only on a psychological level, as I touched on earlier, with this whole idea of aid, but it actually erodes the political systems in these countries. There's nothing I find more frustrating when I hear people say, oh, the problem in Africa is we need more democracy. We cannot have any form of democracy if we are not able to hold our governments accountable when they fail to deliver healthcare, education, infrastructure, and national security.
Exactly.
The essence of democracy is a contract. The government says, we're going to tax you as individuals, and the individuals say to the government, you can tax us, but in return, you must provide us with public goods, education, healthcare, infrastructure, national security. What happens 5 years down the road if the government has not delivered on those things, education, healthcare, and so on? Well, we go to the elections and we vote the government out. That is the sanctity of the contract of democracy. Unfortunately, throwing aid at despots and tyrants across Africa, but also around the world, means that you sever that link between the individual and their government. What does that mean? It means even if you have governments running around that are not doing their jobs, they still have access to money that allows them to remain in power. This is the essence of the problem with aid. It's not just a psychological one, it completely damages the political system. Just for your information.
But you know, it's very interesting because what you're saying about Africa, I think applies worldwide.
Of course it does.
It's the same story.
It has been the marker of South America for many decades. South America did turn the corner. We know what's happened in Chile. Brazil is in many ways a success story. Argentina, Mexico. There are many success stories occurring. Even in Africa, South Africa is a shining light. But these countries have deliberately chosen to go against the grain of international policy. They are defying international policy. China, India, all these countries have basically said, we are not going to listen to what the international policymakers are telling us is right. It was interesting, on the way here, I was reading an article that the Chinese Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Finance from India have written a letter to the Europeans and to the Americans saying, you get your house in order. Do not call us and ask us for money. We have our own problems. And let's just be grateful that we live in such an amazing and interesting time. Can you believe that? Emerging countries, China was poorer than most African countries 30 years ago. Today, it is the second largest economy in the world. By 2017, it will be the largest economy in the world. Think about that. It's possible. We've got to make it happen. Otherwise, the issues of income inequality that we're talking about here, the pressures of resource scarcity, with 9 billion people on the planet, 2 billion new people in the middle class globally, we're ill-prepared for that. And I really urge you all to be part of this discussion, but also let's just do what we know creates economic success. We know what creates economic success. Let us not blind other people by providing solutions that we know do not work.
In few words, the economic success, I'm sorry. If I understood correctly, the formula for success that everybody knows is really a good market system?
Absolutely. And by the way, before you start throwing tomatoes and saying, oh, Occupy,
no, on the contrary.
That, it's not to say that the market system is perfect. Of course, there will be challenges. But let us remember that it is absolutely the system that has delivered economic growth, meaningfully reduced poverty, and has been the basis of political freedom. There is no other system. And believe me, I'm not boasting, I have traveled the world. I've been to every continent. I've been to Russia, I've been to Brazil, China, all across Africa. You will not get political freedom until you have a strong fundamental economic system so that you can create a middle class to hold your government accountable. Simple as that.
Bravo.
Well, I agree 100%. I mean, when I started my business career 30 years ago, I had a chance to visit Korea, China. At that time, we were a very small operation. But every time I went there, I was amazed at the poverty that existed in Korea and in China. And frankly, it was not an agreeable place to visit. But people were hardworking, and they were optimistic. Now, I visit the same places just a few months ago, and I am stunned by the progress that you see in Korea. You could really want to stay there for a week on a vacation. It used to be they didn't have any good restaurants, no amenities, nothing like that. Now, it's truly a first world economy. And what to say of China? China, there's just two words, big and grow. That's what we hear. And it's true. At the same time, what has happened in our country, in Mexico? Well, there's been progress, of course, in 30 years. So when my international friends ask me, what do you think about Mexico? I say, well, we're going to do okay. We're going to grow. They say, well, how is it? Because you have so many problems, the security problem, the inequality. No. 112 million Mexicans will not be stopped. But having said that, I also have to say we could have done much better. If in these 30 years we have had better management and more competition, we would have done much better. And we could have been a super first world country also. So that is the opportunity that I'm looking for and that I really desire for my country.
Can I just say, it's not just 120 million Mexicans. 88% of the world lives in the emerging markets. Do not forget, they will not be stopped. Absolutely not.
It is pretty hard to actually sell your policies to Africa because go against the interest of the powerful and the people that are in power. And of course, that's the reason your book has been so provocative and so important. And the people, it's not going to be stopped. What's your next step? What should we do?
Well, I mean, look, for me, to throw out a cliche, every cloud has a silver lining. The best thing for Africa, two things have happened in Africa, which I think have been fantastic. One has been the financial crisis. It has left the traditional donors, the United States and Europe, who have been deliberately refused to consider Africa in any other light than a source or a destination of pity. Those countries now have such significant economic problems that African governments are going to be forced to find solutions to deliver economic growth and reduce poverty. It's as simple as that. The second thing that has happened, which I think has been fantastic for the continent, has been the arrival of the Chinese. You will remember I said that we do know what creates economic growth, and trade is a key part of that equation. For 50 years, African products, bananas, corn, sugar, cotton, have been locked out of the most developed markets of Europe and the United States. The United States has imposed farm subsidies, and the Europeans have imposed common agriculture policies, which has basically left African countries desperate. We've simply been unable to sell our goods into these markets. Well, as my mother always said, it's important for a woman to have more than one suitor. So rather than Africa focusing on Europe and the United States, along comes China, Brazil, India. China has 7% arable land, 1.3 billion people it needs to feed. It comes to Africa and says, we need your produce, we need food, and we will buy your food at market prices. That is the best thing that has happened to the African continent. And all I hear as I make my travels through Europe and the United States is it's neocolonialism. It's the Chinese are taking advantage. They're bringing their own workers. They have nothing positive to say about what has been an amazing journey, not just for China, but for the emerging world in general. I, for one, I'm not saying that the Chinese are perfect, but given the choice of living in a poverty-stricken economy where aid is given and African children are told that they are nothing but a drain on the global economy, and living in an environment where there are roads, there are jobs, there's investment, there's a bustling economy, and where Africans can stand up and have discussions with the Chinese about investment and opportunities for long-term success of the continent, I will always choose the latter.
So just to end, I don't know if you would like to ask a question to Ricardo and vice versa, and he talked about inequality and very provocative terms. I don't know what you believe or share.
I just want to invite Ricardo to please come to Africa and roll out your program. I know you've got 27 or 2,900 businesses here, stores. I think that's exactly what we need. I want to assure you, I know all you see when you watch CNN is bad news on that continent. If you believe that, you're going to miss out on what is probably the biggest opportunity coming. Africa is the next Asia, I believe, because you've already had success in South America and large extent in Asia. Remember that in order for economies to grow in these emerging economies, you've got to be growing at least 7% a year. Many economies like Mexico, Malaysia, and so on have done so well that they're going to find it, I think, more difficult to grow at higher rates of growth. It's just a natural part of economic growth. So if you really want to invest and you really want to make money, the place to go where there's going to be much more upside is places like Africa. And may I just throw out one data point, particularly for the people in the room who are still negative and think Africa is just commodities. There are now 15 stock markets in Africa, over 500 stocks that you can buy. 85% of those stocks are non-commodity stocks. They're banking stocks, telecommunications, retail. And so again, if you watch CNN, watch press, and think it's all a big commodity story, you're going to miss out. The fact that Africa was able to hold a successful World Cup is just the first step in Africa's belief and arrival as an equal partner on the global stage. And I hope you don't miss out on that.
Well, thank you. I'll take that up. Gracias, Dambisa.
Well, por alguna razón, for one reason que ahorita quedó muy clara, it's very clear now, don't believe everything you think. Muchas gracias a ambos.
Gracias.
Muy amables.
Gracias.